Imagine standing in the freezing Scandinavian mud, right? The year is 900.
Oh man, just the cold alone, yeah.
Exactly, the biting cold. And you are holding the thick, coarse mane of your absolute best horse.
Right, and we have to remember, this isn't a pet. This horse guarantees your mobility, your status, your survival, basically.
Yeah, it's everything.
No.
And you have a heavy iron knife in your other hand.
It's an intense image to just sit with for a second.
It really is. You're about to slit the animal's throat.
Ugh.
But you aren't doing this to wash away your sins.
No, not at all.
You aren't doing this to seek spiritual enlightenment or to quiet the anxieties of your soul. You are doing this because you need a massive favor.
You're making a deal.
Yes, you're about to secure a binding business deal with a god. So today on our deep dive, we are stripping away the Marvel movies. We're getting rid of the romanticized Victorian poetry.
Goodness, we really need to look past all that.
Yeah, we're even setting aside the internal mythology of the Norse world. We are shifting our focus entirely from what the Norse believed in their heads to what they actually did with their hands.
Which is such a vital distinction, you know?
It changes everything. We are exploring the religion of the longhouse, the freshly plowed field, the raucous feast, and of course the flaming funeral ship.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Do it.
Because, I mean, to understand how a Norse pagan actually lived their faith, we have to start by completely dismantling our modern architecture of what a religion is supposed to look like.
Yeah, you really have to empty your conceptual cup entirely here.
Yeah.
If you walk into this historical landscape looking for the familiar scaffolding of modern faith, you will find absolutely nothing.
Just empty space.
Exactly. The first massive hurdle for a lot of people is the sheer terrifying lack of central structure. I mean, there was no holy book.
Right. No Bible, no Quran, nothing like that. We are dealing with an entirely oral culture. The myths, the poetry, the wisdom of the gods, it was all transmitted through spoken word, constantly morphing around the fire.
Which means it wasn't standardized at all.
Not even a little bit. Because of that oral fluidity, what a farmer in Iceland held to be, the absolute truth about Thor, might be fundamentally different from what a chieftain in deep forest Sweden practiced.
Oh, wow. So no consistency across regions.
Nope. There was no Vatican, no Pope, no central council of clerics convening to establish official doctrine or stamp out heresy.
So the lack of a central authority is one thing, but I think the deeper philosophical shock for modern listeners is the complete absence of sin.
Oh yeah, that's a huge one.
Right. When we look at the Abrahamic traditions that dominate the modern world, there's this foundational premise that humanity carries some sort of moral impurity.
Like original sin.
Exactly. Whether it's original sin or just the daily struggle against temptation, the divine is deeply concerned with your internal state. God is watching your private thoughts, your hidden moral failings, your silent prayers.
Yeah, there's a constant surveillance of the soul, essentially.
But in the Norse framework, if I'm a farmer in a fjord, the gods are not looking down from Asgard judging me for having impure thoughts.
They absolutely are not.
They aren't grading me on my spiritual purity at all.
No, the gods could not care less about your internal monologue. The relationship between a human and a god in the Norse world was not built on groveling or begging for forgiveness.
Or seeking salvation for a tainted soul.
Exactly. It was intensely practical, it was physical, and it was reciprocal. It operated entirely on the mechanics of the gift economy.
The gift economy, this is such a crucial concept.
It's everything. In a society without a minted centralized currency or, a sprawling bureaucratic state, human relationships were maintained through the physical exchange of wealth.
You're right, because you can't just write a check.
You can't. If a chieftain wanted power, he didn't run a political campaign. He gave out arm rings, weapons, and land.
And by accepting that sword or that silver ring, the follower is instantly legally obligated to provide their loyalty and military service, right?
Yes. A gift in this world is never just a polite present.
Like getting a birthday card.
Right. A gift is an ironclad contract.
So the Norse simply took that exact socioeconomic framework, that physical gift-giving, and they projected it upward onto the cosmos.
That's exactly what they did. Your relationship with the divine was a transactional partnership. And we see this explicitly laid out in the sources.
Oh, really? Where is it written down?
It's in the Havamal. That's the ancient poem that serves as the purported wisdom of Odin himself. The text is incredibly pragmatic.
Almost like a survival guide.
Very much so. And there's one line in there that acts as the absolute bedrock of their worldview. It says, "A gift always looks for a return."
A gift always looks for a return. Wow. That completely redefines the idea of worship.
It really does.
It's not this parent-child dynamic where I have to follow the house rules to be considered a quote-unquote good boy.
No, not at all.
It's more like, okay, think of it like liquidating your retirement account to invest in a volatile startup. You are transferring immense, life-sustaining wealth into an unseen asset, and you are expecting a massive, tangible return on your investment.
I love that analogy. That is exactly the dynamic. You are drawing the god into a binding relationship. You give them a high-value sacrifice, and by the deep, inescapable cultural logic of the Norse world, that god is now in your debt.
Wait, the god owes you.
Yes, they are obligated to return the favor, maybe with a bountiful harvest, or protection from a brutal winter, or a tactical advantage in an upcoming raid.
That's wild. So you stand up, you hand over something of immense value, and you essentially say, here is my contribution, now do your part.
Precisely. It's a negotiation.
So if the entire religion hinges on obligating the gods through this high-stakes gift economy, the currency you use becomes the most critical element of your life.
Oh, absolutely.
You can't obligate Thor with, like, a polite prayer before bed or a carved wooden trinket, right? You need leverage.
You need something that hurts to give away. Which brings us to the beating heart of Norse religious practice, the blót.
The blót. Okay, let's get into this.
The word blót is linguistically tethered to the word for blood. At its core, the blót was a ritual sacrifice. And usually we're talking about a high-value animal.
Like the horse we mentioned at the start.
Exactly. We are talking about cattle, pigs, and most importantly, horses. These were subsistence farming societies. They were living in a harsh, unforgiving climate. An animal was not a pet.
Right. It was their livelihood. It represented calories, labor, basically survival.
Exactly. So sacrificing a healthy horse in the year 900, that is a staggering transfer of wealth. You are willingly destroying a vital piece of your own economic engine.
Which proves to the gods how serious you are.
Right. The sheer cost of it was the point. The gods knew what it cost you.
So what actually happened during the ritual itself?
Well, during the ritual, the animal was slaughtered, and its blood was collected in specialized vessels. They called them blótbollar.
Blótbollar.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the blood was considered intensely sacred. It was practically vibrating with spiritual power and the raw essence of life.
Because blood is life, literally.
Exactly. The practitioners would take bundles of twigs called the flotnar. They'd dip them into these bowls of blood and physically paint the environment.
Literally splashing it around.
Yes. They would sprinkle the blood across the altars, splatter it against the timber walls of the longhouse, and even shake it over the congregation themselves.
Oh, wow. Over the people.
Over everyone.
Mm-hmm.
The blood blessed everything it touched. It was a visceral, highly sensory experience. Think about it. The smell of copper in the air, the visual shock of the bright red on the dark timber, the physical touch of the wet droplets hitting your face.
That is intense. But the blood is just the unseen essence given to the gods, right? The physical meat still remains.
Yes. And this is where the Norse practice violently diverges from our modern assumptions of what a religious ceremony looks like. What's fascinating here is what they did with the meat.
Right, because they didn't just throw it away.
No, they took that exceptionally high-quality meat, threw it into massive cauldrons over the longhouse fires, boiled it up, and the entire community gorged themselves on it.
Wait, so their primary form of worship was literally just eating and drinking?
Essentially, yes. The sacrifice was not about total destruction. In some ancient Mediterranean cultures, you see what are called holocausts.
Where the offering is burned completely to ash.
Exactly. So the smoke goes up to the gods, leaving absolute nothing for the humans to consume. The Norse didn't do that. The blót was about sharing a sacred meal with the divine.
You invited the gods to your dinner party.
Exactly. You gave them the life force, the blood, and the community consumed the physical nourishment.
That flips the script on worship entirely for me.
Yeah.
When modern people think of solemn worship, they usually imagine fasting, quiet contemplation, denying the physical body to elevate the mind, right?
Yeah, very austere.
But in the longhouse, worship is a massive, loud, meat-heavy, beer-soaked dinner party. The caloric intake itself is a holy act.
And the alcohol was just as vital as the meat. They brewed massive quantities of ale and mead specifically for these events. The act of toasting, which they called the bragarfull, was heavily formalized.
So it wasn't just like getting drunk for the sake of it.
No, you didn't just drink to get drunk. The chieftain or leader would stand, hold a horn of ale, and formally dedicate it. The first toast was almost always to Odin for victory and power.
Makes sense for Odin.
Right. And the second was often to Njörður and Freyr for peace and good seasons. By drinking from that consecrated horn, the alcohol passing your lips was the literal act of worship.
There's this brilliant historical anecdote in the Heimskringla that I think perfectly illustrates how non-negotiable this physical feasting was.
Oh, the story of Hakon the Good.
Yes.
Yes.
Specifically, the saga of Hakon the Good. So for the listener, Hakon was a king of Norway who had been raised in England, and while he was there, he converted to Christianity.
Right, he comes back as a Christian king.
Exactly. When he returned to rule Norway, he tried to quietly avoid the pagan blóts, just sort of step back from them. But at a massive autumn festival, the pagan farmers essentially cornered him.
They weren't having it.
Not at all. They forced him to sit at the high seat in the hall. When the horse meat was boiled, they demanded he eat it. He refused. They demanded he drink the broth. He refused again.
He's really holding his ground.
He is, but it gets tense. Finally, they compromised by forcing the Christian king to just hold his mouth over the cauldron and inhale the steam of the boiling horse broth.
Which is such a funny, gritty detail.
It's amazing. And then, when the drinking horn was passed to him, Hakon secretly made the sign of the cross over it before drinking. The pagan farmers saw it and got angry. But Hakon's ally quickly stepped in to cover for him, shouting, "No, the king is just making the sign of Thor's hammer to bless the drink."
That story is incredibly revealing. It shows us everything about their mindset.
Because they didn't care what he believed inside.
Exactly. The pagan farmers weren't asking Hakon to write an essay on his theological beliefs. They didn't care what was in his heart or his head. They demanded physical participation in the mechanics of the gift economy.
Because the stakes were life and death.
Yes. If the king doesn't eat the meat and drink the ale, the gods don't get their gift, the contract is broken, and the entire region might starve next winter. His internal Christianity was totally irrelevant to them. His external refusal to feast was a direct threat to their survival.
Wow. But throwing a massive livestock-depleting feast is a logistical nightmare. You can't just sustain that level of consumption arbitrarily every week.
No, you'd run out of animals instantly.
Right. The Norse had to perfectly synchronize these massive gifts to the gods with the brutal realities of their agricultural survival.
They absolutely did. The sacred calendar was not dictated by abstract theology like, some arbitrary holy day.
Yeah.
It was dictated by the earth, the ice, and the harvest.
The actual seasons.
Yes. They recognized 3 major mandatory blóts throughout the year, and these marked the critical pivot points of their survival. The first one was the winter nights, or Høstblot, held in the autumn.
So the sources describe autumn as a time to give thanks for the harvest and seek protection for the dark months ahead. But underneath that spiritual gratitude is a ruthless economic reality.
A very grim reality.
Because in a pre-industrial Scandinavian winter, you simply cannot harvest enough fodder to keep all your animals alive until spring. There just isn't enough grass. The harsh climate dictates a massive culling. You have to slaughter a significant portion of your livestock anyway, or they will literally slowly starve to death in the snow.
Exactly. And the Norse took that grim economic necessity and elevated it into a sacred event. Since you were forced to cull the herds anyway, you suddenly have this immense surplus of fresh meat.
It's the perfect time for a party.
It is the absolute optimal time to throw a magnificent blót. You honor the gods with a massive influx of gifts, and you gorge the community to build up body fat before the killing cold sets in. They synchronize their religious obligations with their agricultural limits perfectly.
That is so pragmatic, and as that cold sets in and the days shrink, we hit the psychological crux of the year, midwinter, or Yule, the winter solstice.
Yule's fascinating because it was less about agricultural pragmatism and more about psychological endurance.
Just getting through the dark.
Yeah, imagine the reality of a Norse winter. You are trapped in a longhouse. The sun barely grazes the horizon for a few hours before plunging you back into freezing darkness. The cold outside is actively trying to kill you. Sickness spreads easily in close quarters.
That sounds miserable.
It was incredibly difficult. So Yule was a defiant, roaring blaze of light, warmth, and communal intoxication thrown directly in the face of the abyss. It was the community gathering around the massive central fire, looking at the darkness outside and shouting, "We are still here and we still have enough food to feast."
It's an act of rebellion against the winter. And if you look at the modern calendar, the echoes of this defiance are everywhere. I want the listener to really think about this. When you celebrate the winter holidays today, lighting the Yule log, stringing up lights to push back the dark outside your house, gathering around a massive glazed ham, or drinking spiced mulled wine, you are directly echoing a 1,000-year-old Norse pagan survival ritual.
It's a direct lineage of behavior.
Yeah. When Christianity eventually took over Scandinavia, they couldn't abolish Yule. The psychological human need for that midwinter defiance was just too deeply rooted in the environment. The church simply painted a Christian veneer over it, but the mechanics of the fire, the meat, the alcohol in the dead of winter remained entirely pagan.
It really proves that the lived practice of a religion often outlives the theology behind it. The physical act of gathering around a fire in the dark transcends the specific names of the gods you happen to be toasting.
Absolutely. And then finally, as the ice cracked and the days lengthened, they held the spring blót, the seeress blót.
Sacrifice for victory.
Right. And this isn't just blessing the planting of the crops, is it? This is blessing the warships.
Oh, entirely. The seas are opening up, the sea ice is melting, the longships are being pushed off the rollers into the surf, and the community is seeking divine favor for the upcoming season of raiding, trading, and violent expansion.
You are investing your sacrifices in Thor and Odin, so they will grant you a return on the battlefield.
Exactly. It is an entirely forward-looking, aggressive festival. So the year breathes with the physical reality of the Norse people culling and preservation in autumn, defiant survival in midwinter, and ambitious expansion in spring.
That makes so much sense. Now, on a local level, like a farm-by-farm basis, these seasonal rhythms sound communal, grounded, and intensely practical. But historical records suggest that when these gatherings scaled up, when the stakes were raised to a regional or national level, the mechanics of the blót escalated into something far more terrifying.
Yes, the scale changes everything.
To explore that, we have to travel to a site that remains the most controversial and debated location in all of Norse history, the great temple at Uppsala, in what is now Sweden.
Uppsala is truly the dark heart of the Norse historiographical debate. Much of what we know, or at least what we think we know, comes from an 11th century chronicler named Adam of Bremen.
Okay, Adam of Bremen, who was he?
He was an incredibly influential Christian cleric, and his writings paint a picture of Uppsala not as a cozy local feast, but as the site of a nightmarish, massive festival held every 9 years, drawing people from across the entire Norse world.
And Adam's description is cinematic in its horror. I mean, he describes a massive temple wrapped in a literal golden chain that shone across the landscape.
A golden chain hanging off the building, yeah.
Inside, he claims there were colossal statues of Thor, Odin, and Freyr. But it's the rituals outside the temple that define the dark legend. Adam wrote that during this 9-year festival, the pagan priests sacrificed 9 males of every living creature: dogs, horses, roosters, and humans.
He specifically highlights a sacred grove adjacent to the temple. Adam describes this grove as so saturated with death that every single tree and leaf was considered fiercely holy, entirely due to the rotting corpses hanging from the branches.
Like something out of a horror movie.
He describes men and animals suspended together in the trees, their blood feeding the roots. It is an apocalyptic vision of pagan barbarism.
But the immediate instinct, right, is to look at the source and call foul. Adam of Bremen is writing in the 1070s. He represents a rival, aggressive religion. The Archbishopric of Bremen was actively trying to convert Scandinavia and expand its political power.
Right, they were competitors.
And Adam never even visited Uppsala himself. He was compiling rumors and reports from Christian missionaries. He has every motive to exaggerate the bloodlust to justify a holy crusade against these quote-unquote monsters. The perfectly theatrical number 9, the golden chain, the hanging humans. It reads like medieval fake news or war propaganda.
It absolutely functions as propaganda. And historians are rightly skeptical of the Golden Temple and the perfectly choreographed hanging of 9 men. We have to treat Adam's text as a hostile document.
So do we just throw this account out completely?
Well, here's the tricky part. We can't entirely dismiss the violence because the archaeology complicates the narrative. The physical evidence beneath the soil does not let us off the hook.
You're talking about the bog bodies.
The bog bodies, yes.
Yeah.
And the wells filled with bones and the burial sites. Across northern Europe, we find remains of humans who were undeniably subjected to ritual killing.
It's hard to argue with a physical body.
Exactly. We find bodies deposited in peat bogs with their throats slashed, or ropes still tied around their necks, often pinned down by woven branches, perfectly preserved by the acidic water.
That's chilling.
In massive structural sites, like the Ring Fortress at Trelleborg, we find wells containing the bones of sacrificed horses, dogs, and young children. And most disturbingly, we have elite burial mounds, where it is forensically obvious that enslaved people were murdered to accompany their masters into the earth.
So we're looking at a murky, bloody middle ground here. Human sacrifice was not a Christian invention designed to slander the Norse. It happened,
It did happen.
but it likely wasn't the cinematic 9x9 Golden Temple horror show Adam of Bremen described.
Right. It was almost certainly rare. Human sacrifice was the absolute highest denomination of the gift economy. You wouldn't use it for a standard spring blót.
Too expensive.
Way too expensive. You would reserve it for moments of profound existential crisis. Say a devastating famine where the animal sacrifices had failed for 3 years straight, a plague, or the funeral of a paramount king. When the community felt they were on the absolute brink of annihilation, they offered the gods the most expensive, agonizing gift possible: human life.
You know, if any of our listeners have watched the historical drama series Vikings, they've seen Adam of Bremen's exact nightmare brought to life.
Oh, yeah. Season 2, right?
Season 2 has a massive sequence at Uppsala featuring the Golden Temple, the giant statues, and the willing human sacrifices walking up to the altar. It's stunning television, but understanding the historiography allows you to watch that scene and realize you are essentially watching an 11th century Christian horror novel adapted for the screen. It's the propaganda turned up to an 11, rooted in a seed of dark archaeological truth.
It perfectly captures the terror their enemies felt. But whether we are talking about a massive, once-in-a-decade gathering at Uppsala or just a local autumn call at a farm, the logistics of these events are staggering.
Just managing the food alone.
Right. You need a massive hall, you need to coordinate the livestock, brew the ale, and manage the peace among heavily armed farmers who might have actual blood feuds with each other.
Which really begs the question, if there is no pope, no Vatican, and no ordained priesthood trained in seminaries, who's actually running this religion? Who's standing at the front of the longhouse, holding the blood bowl, and making sure the contract with the gods is executed correctly?
To answer that, we have to look at how Norse society organized power. The religious leaders were the exact same people as the political leaders.
No separation of church and state at all.
None. They were a single, unified entity. The key figure here is the goi. The plural is guar, and the etymology of that word is not subtle at all. The word goi is directly linked to the word for God.
So a goi is a chieftain. If two farmers are arguing over where a property line ends, they go to the goi to settle the legal dispute. If a raiding party from a neighboring fjord shows up, the goi organizes the defense. He is the local political boss, the judge, and the military commander.
And that exact same political boss is the chief priest. The goi owned the godor, which was not necessarily a piece of physical land, but the actual office of power. The goi was responsible for maintaining the local sacred sites. He funded the massive blóts out of his own personal wealth.
Oh, he paid for it himself?
Yes. He stood at the head of the hall, consecrated the ale, and slaughtered the horse.
To put this in modern terms for the listener, it's like if your local mayor was also the archbishop.
That's a great way to think about it.
The town hall where you debate local zoning laws is the exact same room where you take communion, and the guy running the city budget is the guy who forgives your sins. It completely fuses secular authority with divine authority.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, consider the massive political leverage this provides. In medieval Christian Europe, the king and the church were two distinct, often competing monoliths.
Right, the pope versus the king, always fighting.
Exactly. The king controlled the armies and the tax revenue, but the pope controlled the theology and the keys to heaven. They constantly clashed. But for the Norse, the godi held both the sword and the sacred twig.
So hosting a blót becomes the ultimate political flex.
Absolutely.
If I am a godi and I invite hundreds of farmers to my hall for the autumn blót, I am not just performing my religious duty, I am visibly demonstrating my economic dominance. I am showing everyone, look at the sheer number of horses I could afford to kill, look at the immense cauldrons of meat I can provide. The gods clearly favor me with massive wealth, which means my leadership is divinely sanctioned, and you should swear your loyalty to me.
It is the gift economy functioning on multiple axes simultaneously. The godi gives a massive sacrifice to the gods. The gods theoretically reciprocate by granting prosperity to the godi.
And then it trickles down.
Exactly. The goi then distributes that prosperity to the farmers in the form of a feast. The farmers, having eaten the godi's meat, are now legally and socially obligated to support him at the local legal assembly, the thing. It is a brilliant, closed-loop engine of power, reciprocity, and religious awe.
It's incredibly loud, highly public, and intensely political. But this public feasting and political maneuvering is only one half of the Norse spiritual experience, isn't it?
It is. It's just the surface, really.
There was an entirely different side to their lived religion, a side that was quiet, intimate, solitary, and dealt exclusively with manipulating the unseen forces that crawled across the landscape.
The everyday magic. While the Goar managed the loud public contracts with the high gods, ordinary people were constantly navigating a profoundly crowded, animistic reality. And the most famous, yet probably the most misunderstood tool for interacting with this unseen world was the runes.
Today, I feel like runes are mostly viewed as like a cool, angular Viking alphabet used to sell beard oil, or they're found carved as graffiti on ancient monuments.
Right, pop culture loves them.
But treating runes merely as an alphabet completely misses their psychological weight.
They functioned as an alphabet, certainly. We have thousands of runestones with mundane messages. So-and-so raised this stone in memory of his father. Or we find merchants carving runes into sticks to act as literal receipts.
Everyday stuff.
Yeah, but underneath that mundane utility was a deep-seated belief that runes were the fundamental source code of reality.
That is such a cool way to phrase it, the source code. In the mythic poetry, the discovery of the runes is a cosmic event. It's not just inventing letters. Odin, the chief of the gods, literally hangs himself by the neck from Yggdrasil, the world tree, for 9 days and nights.
A brutal sacrifice.
He starves himself, denies himself water, and stabs himself in the side with his own spear. He pushes himself to the absolute brink of death, peering into the abyss just to grasp the runes. You don't endure cosmic crucifixion to learn a basic alphabet. You endure that to seize the levers of the universe.
Exactly. The word rune itself carries the connotation of a secret, a whisper, or hidden knowledge. In an oral society, the very concept of writing, taking an invisible thought, an abstract intention, and physically carving it into a piece of wood or bone so that it outlives you, that was viewed as inherently magical.
It's a transfer of mind into matter.
Yes. If you possessed the hidden knowledge of the runes, and you carved the correct sequence while chanting the correct incantations, you weren't just writing words, you were bending reality.
There's a famous story in Egil's saga that perfectly demonstrates this. Egil Skallagrimsson, who was this legendary warrior and poet, stays at a farm where the farmer's daughter has been deathly ill for a long time. Someone had tried to carve healing runes on a piece of whalebone for her, but they were an amateur.
She didn't know the code?
Right. They carved the wrong sequence. Egil finds the bone under her bed, scrapes off the incorrect runes, burns them, and then carves the correct, masterful sequence. He places it under her pillow, and she immediately recovers. The runes themselves were a technology. Used incorrectly, they caused sickness. Carved by a master, they healed.
You could carve runes on the rim of a drinking horn to shatter it if the ale inside was poisoned. You could carve them into the mast of a longship to calm a storm. Or you could carve them with malicious intent, bearing a runic curse under your enemy's threshold to rot their livestock.
Very practical magic.
It was a tangible, accessible form of power for those who knew the secrets. But beyond the runes, there was a deeper, much more complex form of magic. Seiðr.
Seiðr. Okay, this is fascinating. If runes are the source code, Seiðr is deep-level hacking. It was a specific branch of magic focused on perceiving and actively influencing fate and destiny. And crucially, it was primarily practiced by a specialist known as a vulva.
A vulva was a seeress, a woman who operated completely outside the normal bounds of the patriarchal family structure. She was itinerant, traveling from settlement to settlement, and she commanded a profound mixture of deep respect and genuine terror.
Because she has so much power.
Oh, immense power. The saga of Eric the Red gives us one of the most meticulously detailed descriptions of a vulva named Thorbjorg. It describes her clothing in striking detail.
What does she wear?
A blue mantle set with stones, a necklace of glass beads, a hood of black lambskin lined with white cat fur. She had calfskin shoes and catskin gloves with the white fur facing inward. She carried a specialized staff with a brass knob. Her physical appearance alone signaled to everyone that she stepped outside normal reality.
When a community was facing a crisis, say a brutal winter, where the fish have vanished and the grain is running out, they would invite the vulva to the longhouse. They would feed her the absolute best food they had left, often the hearts of various animals, which again highlights that transfer of life essence. But it's the ritual itself that is so captivating.
The ritual of Seiðr required a high seat. This was a raised platform erected in the center of the hall, physically elevating her above the mundane world. The vulva would sit, and a circle of women would sing specialized, rhythmic, hypnotic songs called Vara Lakur.
Sort of like chanting to induce a trance.
Exactly. The continuous chanting functioned as a psychological tether, allowing the vulva to enter a deep, altered state of consciousness. In this trance, her spirit would detach from her physical body, traveling through the unseen realms, negotiating with spirits, and reading the threads of destiny spun by the Norns.
And then when she finally woke from the trance, she would sit on that high seat and deliver prophecies. She would tell the chieftain who would survive the winter, who would die in the upcoming feud, and whether the harvest would return.
And her word was considered absolute. But this raises a profound philosophical contradiction that cuts right to the core of Norse psychology.
Right. Here's where it gets really interesting. From our deep dives into the mythology, we know that the Norse believed fate was fundamentally immutable. The Norns spin the thread of your life at birth, and the length of that thread cannot be altered. Not even the gods can change their ultimate fate at Ragnarok.
It's locked in.
So, if destiny is completely fixed and unchangeable, what was the point of asking the vulva what was going to happen? Why are these farmers paying her their best resources to tell them a future they are powerless to avoid? You can't change it anyway.
It's an essential question. You did not pay the vulva to learn your future so you could change it or run away from it. Running from your fate was the ultimate act of cowardice. You asked her so you could prepare for it.
Preparation over prevention.
Yes. The Norse worldview was incredibly fatalistic, but it wasn't passive. If the vulva tells you that you are going to die in a battle next spring, you don't hide in a cave. You sharpen your sword, you settle your debts, you organize your inheritance, and you walk onto that battlefield determined to die with such ferocious bravery that poets will sing about your final moments for 300 years.
Wow.
Knowing the future wasn't about escaping fate. It was about meeting your inescapable doom with maximum aesthetic honor.
It's a psychological toolkit for dealing with absolute uncertainty. You basically say, I cannot control when I die, but I have absolute control over how I look when it happens.
Precisely. Now, there is a critical sociological element to seer that we must explore. It was rigidly structurally defined as women's magic.
The gender taboo around this was massive.
It was one of the most severe taboos in their culture. The practice of seer involved entering a trance, opening oneself up to possession by spirits, and essentially becoming a passive vessel. In the hypermasculine, fiercely aggressive culture of Norse men, this passivity was viewed as deeply shameful.
Because men were supposed to be the active aggressors.
Exactly. For a man to practice seer was to commit ergi.
Ergi. That's a loaded word. We will unpack ergi in detail in a moment. But it essentially means being unmanly, submissive, or cowardly. If a man practiced trance magic, he was stripped of his masculine honor.
Which is what makes the mythology so utterly shocking. Odin, the Allfather, the god of war, the patron of chieftains and kings, is repeatedly described as a master of seer. He actively engages in the very magic his own worshippers considered shameful and emasculating.
Why would the ultimate Viking god do the one thing Vikings considered humiliating?
Because Odin's defining characteristic isn't physical strength. It is his relentless, borderline psychotic thirst for knowledge.
Oh, like giving up his eye.
Yes. He sacrifices his eye to the well of Mimir, he hangs himself for the runes, and he willingly endures the societal shame of ergi to master seir. It demonstrates to the Norse listener that wisdom and foresight are the ultimate powers in the universe so valuable that the chief god would sacrifice his own masculine honor to possess them.
That's incredible. And the landscape wasn't just filled with the high magic of runes and vulvas either. The everyday reality for a normal farmer was crowded with localized, invisible neighbors.
The Landvitir, the spirits of the land. The Norse worldview was profoundly animistic. Every boulder, every waterfall, every ancient grove of trees had a resident spirit.
So you were never alone?
Never. If you sailed to a new shore, you took the carved dragon head off your long ship so you wouldn't frighten the Landvitir. If you built a farm, you had to negotiate a treaty with the spirit of the hill behind your house. You would leave out small offerings, a pat of butter, a splash of ale, just to keep the peace.
You could even weaponize them. Going back to Egil Skallagrimsson when he was exiled from Norway by King Eric Bloodaxe, he didn't just sail away quietly. He took a horse's head, shoved it onto a wooden pole, carved curses into the wood, and aimed the rotting head toward the mainland.
The night.
Right. He declared he was erecting a Nistang, a cursing pole, designed to terrify and agitate all the Landvitir of Norway so they would wander the landscape in a panic, causing chaos until they drove the king out of the country.
He weaponized the invisible ecosystem. And that intimate, highly localized spirituality where you are constantly negotiating with the rock in your backyard is exactly what was eradicated when Christianity centralized divine power into a single, distant god in a church.
Such a massive shift in how you experience the world.
But this discussion of what is considered shameful magic points us toward the actual beating heart of Norse society. If they didn't have a holy book giving them the Ten Commandments, what was the rule book? How did they know right from wrong?
This brings us to the true law. If you don't have a god threatening you with eternal hellfire for breaking the rules, what keeps society from collapsing into absolute anarchy?
The answer is an unforgiving, ironclad honor code.
Their true moral law was their reputation. It operated on a brutal binary between two concepts, drengskapur and nistri.
Let's examine the positive ideal first. Drengskapur. This word encapsulates everything a Norse person was supposed to strive for. It means bravery, generosity, unflinching loyalty to your kin, and a stoic demeanor in the face of suffering. But above all other traits, drengskapur meant absolute integrity regarding your word.
In a society without a police force, without a centralized court system to enforce paper contracts, your spoken oath is the only structural integrity the community has.
It's the glue holding everything together.
If you say you will provide 10 cows for a dowry, or that you will stand beside your neighbor in a feud, that oath is legally binding reality.
To break an oath, to be a liar, or to betray your kin was the ultimate transgression. A person with drengskap gives their wealth freely, faces a larger army without stepping backward, and keeps their promises even if it costs them their life.
And the dark mirror to that is Ni.
Ni is the manifestation of social death. It represents shame, cowardice, oath-breaking, and deceit. To be accused of being Ni was not just a playground insult, it was a formal stripping of your social worth.
You lose your humanity almost.
Exactly. If the community decided you were Nid, no one would trade with you, no one would marry into your family, and no chieftain would protect you. You were a ghost.
And within this broad category of shame, there was the specific, highly charged accusation we mentioned earlier, ergi.
Ergi was a direct attack on a man's honor, implying submissiveness, unmanliness, or cowardice. It was considered an insult so devastating, so legally destructive to a person's standing, that it instantly justified lethal violence. The Norse law codes actually state that if a man calls you ergi, you have the legal right and the social obligation to challenge him to a holmgang.
A holmgang?
A formalized duel to the death.
So you essentially had to fight them, because if someone called you ergi and you didn't immediately demand a duel, the community would view your silence as a confession. The accusation would become reality and your reputation would be annihilated.
This is the crux of their moral architecture. Their morality was entirely externalized. You didn't do the right thing because you felt a quiet, internal pang of conscience, or because you feared a deity would punish your soul after death.
You did the right thing because of social pressure.
Yes. You did it because if you didn't, the community would label you a coward, your family name would be ruined for generations, and you would be legally unprotected, easily killed by anyone who wanted your land. The ultimate judge of your life wasn't sitting on a throne in Asgard. The judges were sitting right across the fire from you, watching your every move.
So what does this all mean for you? The terrifying weight of the collective gaze. Your moral law is the story people tell about you. And that story, that reputation, was the absolute only thing that would outlive you when you finally face the ultimate threshold of Norse life.
Death.
Death. If your entire religion is focused on lived practice, the physical exchange of gifts and the maintenance of your reputation, your funeral cannot be a quiet, solemn affair. It has to be a monumental event.
Because for the Norse, death was not the end of the story. It was a highly lingvistical relocation.
You didn't arrive in the afterlife as a naked, ethereal wisp of a soul. You needed your gear. The Norse grave goods are astonishing. We find warriors buried with perfectly preserved swords, shields, and butchered horses to ride in the next world.
And it wasn't just the men. We find high-status women buried with intricate weaving tools, imported beads, and the heavy iron keys to the household estate.
Keys?
Yes. The keys were the ultimate symbol of a woman's financial and legal authority. They literally unlocked the wealth of the farm.
So they provisioned the dead with the exact items they would need to maintain their earthly status in the unseen world. You needed food, you needed weapons, and you needed wealth.
And for the absolute apex of society, a simple hole in the ground was insufficient. They required a vehicle.
The ship burials. It makes perfect symbolic sense for a maritime culture. The longship was the engine of their wealth, their war, and their exploration. It is the perfect vessel to transport a chieftain across the Vale.
The Oseberg ship in Norway is the pinnacle of this practice. Archaeologists excavated a stunningly preserved, intricately carved wooden longship buried under a massive mound of blue clay. Inside, they found the remains of 2 women.
The wealth in that grave is staggering.
The sheer volume of wealth buried with them is difficult to comprehend. They had a spectacularly carved wooden cart, sledges, tapestries, imported silk, and the skeletons of over a dozen horses, dogs, and even 2 peacocks.
Peacocks. In freezing Norway, the expense of importing live peacocks from the Mediterranean or the Middle East, only to snap their necks and throw them in a grave, is the ultimate flex of the gift economy.
Exactly. Burying a fully functional longship, a piece of technology that took hundreds of trees and thousands of hours of skilled labor to construct, was an astronomical destruction of capital. It was a permanent monument to the power of those women.
But the Osberg burial is like the quiet, earthen version of a funeral. The loud version involves fire.
No.
And for that, we have one of the most vital, visceral, historical documents in human history. The eyewitness account of an Arab diplomat named Ibn Fadlan.
This account is unparalleled. In the year 922, Ibn Fadlan is traveling up the Volga River in what is now Russia. He encounters a group of Norse traders and mercenaries known as the Rus.
And he gets embedded with them.
Yes, and while he is with them, one of their paramount chieftains dies. Ibn Fadlan acts as a fastidious, slightly horrified anthropological observer, and he writes down the entire multi-day funeral process in staggering detail.
He notes that when the chieftain died, he was temporarily buried in a shallow grave for 10 days while they prepared his estate. They took his immense wealth and divided it into precise thirds.
1/3 for his family, 1/3 to tailor magnificent funeral garments, and 1/3 entirely dedicated to brewing nabid, a strong alcohol for the funeral feast.
For 10 days, the camp engages in a relentless, exhausting cycle of drinking and feasting. And during this time, Ibn Fadlan notes that the community asks the chieftain's enslaved women who will volunteer to die with him.
Which is horrifying to modern ears.
Completely. One young woman steps forward. She is heavily guarded, but she is treated almost like a deity for those days, drinking, singing, and preparing for her transition.
Then the final ritual begins. They pull the chieftain's massive ship up onto the land, propping it up on wooden stakes. They build a wooden pavilion on the deck, outfitting it with Byzantine silk and cushions. They exhume the chieftain, dress him in custom-made silk garments with gold buttons, and place him in the pavilion.
And then the sensory overload begins. Ibn Fadlan watches them systematically execute the gift economy. They bring a dog, cut it in 2, and throw the pieces into the ship.
It's very brutal.
They bring 2 horses, force them to run until they're sweating and exhausted, hack them in pieces with swords, and throw the meat onto the ship. They sacrifice cows, a rooster, and a hen. They pile the ship with weapons, food, and strong drink.
And then the darkest part of the account, the enslaved woman. Ibn Fadlan describes a terrifying older woman in the camp who orchestrates the human sacrifice. He calls her the Angel of Death, describing her as thick-set and grim.
The Angel of Death.
The enslaved woman engages in ritualized sexual intercourse with the men of the camp, a transfer of life force and a reaffirmation of the community's bond with the deceased. Finally, she is brought onto the ship into the pavilion with the dead chieftain.
And it isn't a quick death. Men beat their shields with wooden staves to drown out her cries, and she is strangled with a rope while the Angel of Death stabs her in the ribs with a broad dagger. Her body is laid next to the chieftain.
The climax of the 10-day buildup arrives. The closest male relative of the chieftain strips completely naked. He takes a piece of wood, sets it on fire, and walks backward toward the ship. He holds the torch behind him, shielding his face so he doesn't look at the dead.
And he thrusts the torch into the wood piled under the ship. The winds catch the flames, and the fire instantly consumes the timber, the silk pavilion, the slaughtered horses, the enslaved girl, and the chieftain.
Ibn Fadlan writes a brilliant detail here. He writes that a Norseman standing next to him laughed through an interpreter, saying, "You Arabs are foolish. You put the people you love into the ground, where the earth and worms devour them. We burn him in the fire instantly so that he enters paradise at once."
It's a total clash of worldviews.
Exactly. Within an hour, an immense fortune was reduced to blowing ash. They built a massive earthen mound over the spot and raised a birch post carved with the chieftain's name.
This raises an important question. The psychological purpose of that fire cannot be overstated. It encapsulates the entire lived religion in one blazing moment.
It's the ultimate synthesis.
It is the ultimate honoring of the gift economy, sending an unimaginable fortune of ships, slaves, and livestock upward in the smoke, obligating the gods and the ancestors to receive him with honor. It is a terrifying, undeniable display of political power to anyone watching, proving the family's immense wealth.
And it is a ritualized, dramatic transition into the unseen spiritual landscape they had negotiated with their entire lives.
It is the ultimate final act, A life lived outward, constantly negotiating with the earth, the neighbors, and the gods through physical action, culminating in a literal blaze of glory designed to sear your name into the memory of the community forever.
It is a religion of action, from the first breath to the final ash.
We have covered incredible ground today. We completely dismantled the modern idea of religion, stepping into a world with no holy book and no concept of sin. We sat at the blót, understanding the brutal economic reality of the gift economy, where blood was the ink on the contract and boiled horse meat was the communion.
We tracked how the grim survival rhythms of the autumn call and the defiant midwinter drinking gave us the modern echo of Yule.
We navigated the contested, bloody soil of Uppsala and explored how the Goar fused political dominance with religious authority in a closed loop of power. We looked at the everyday magic, the reality hacking of the runes, and the Volva on her high seat predicting an inescapable fate, while Odin embraced societal shame for wisdom.
We decoded the true law, the unforgiving binary of dringskap honor and knees shame, and followed it all the way to the banks of the Volga to watch a chieftain's legacy burn into the sky.
And looking ahead, understanding this physical, lived religion is the skeleton key to unlocking the rest of Norse society.
It really is. To truly grasp the Viking Age, we will eventually have to explore how these exact religious realities shaped their rigid class structures, from the jarls down to the horrific reality of the thrall slave trade that built the ships, as well as the surprisingly robust legal and financial rights of Norse women, like the ones buried at Alseburg.
That's going to be a massive deep dive. But for now, I want to leave you with a final lingering idea to mull over. We started this deep dive by talking about the architecture of modern belief. Today, we tend to define our personal goodness by our internal thoughts.
What's in our hearts?
Right? We judge ourselves by what we feel in our hearts, our private intentions, the silent purity of our minds. But the Norse built a world where your internal belief meant absolutely nothing if it wasn't acted out in the physical world. Their entire universe hinged on a shared meal, a physical gift given, an oath kept out loud, or a small offering left on a rock.
Action over intent.
It makes you wonder if your entire worldview, your entire worth as a human being, was judged exclusively by your outward physical actions and your reputation in your community, rather than your internal, private thoughts. How differently would you live your life tomorrow?
To step entirely out of the mind and into the action, it's a heavy thought.
Thank you so much for joining us on this custom deep dive. And next time you look out into the dark, remember the rhythm of the longhouse.